Welcome back to Switch Point, and we are here, episode 15. And today, July is officially here, so we figured what better time than to talk about a new Nintendo Direct because isn't that everyone's favorite topic?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure every single month there is a new discussion about whether or not there'll be a Nintendo Direct. Even after when there's been a Nintendo Direct maybe a few days ago, immediately people will start asking, when's the next one? Because that's just the nature of how these sort of things work.
Honestly, I think it's pretty valid. I can't lie, the Switch 2 Direct was amazing. It was great to see the games we saw. We've got Donkey Kong coming up. But after that, we've got Super Mario Party Jamboree, Nintendo Switch 2 Edition plus Jamboree TV. That's a mouthful. And then we've got Kirby in the Forgotten Land, Nintendo Switch 2 Edition plus Starcross World. Nintendo, please stop making these game titles so long. But beyond that, we have no games dated besides Pokemon Legends, which, hey, happy for the Pokemon fans. But, there's got to be a direct soon. And I think this is a possibility now. It's a possibility in August, and it's a possibility in September. But the big thing for me, I think Nintendo can get by without having a first party direct until September. They've done it before. We have games that are dated for the next 2 months. But what they can't get by without doing is a third party direct. And that's kind of where my mind is for this month. I expect a Nintendo Direct Mini or a Nintendo Direct Partner Showcase because we have too many games that are seemingly coming to Switch 2 that we have not heard about that need to be announced. And I'll be honest, Switch 2 right now, it's a lot of fun. There are literally no games for third parties basically dated. And that just has to change. And I feel like that the floodgates are waiting and it's really just up to Nintendo to open them. But I don't know. Do you think we're getting like a first party combined or just a third party showcase? Because for me, I'm like, it has to be a third party one, in my opinion.
I think personally, I hope it's a mix between first and third party. It's been, it feels like a long time since the April Direct. And keep in mind that in the distance between when the original Switch was officially shown off in January of 2017, there was a huge direct showing off other games that would be coming out in the second half of that year in June. Obviously, the gap there was about 5 months. Do I think we need to wait 5 months for the next big first and third party direct? Who knows? It wouldn't surprise me if we don't get the main combined one until September, but I completely agree that if we don't get a first party direct or a mixed direct soon, we absolutely need a direct focus entirely on third party. Because there's a lot of games right now that are kind of in an unknown state. Even just looking at first party alone, Kirby Air Riders, Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment, I almost said Age of Calamity, and I believe, oh yeah, Metroid Prime 4 still don't
Oh
have
yeah, that
release
game.
dates. Yeah, that game. And we still don't know when they're coming out. So we need more information on those. And there's a lot of third party games that are kind of in the wayside that hopefully will come to the console soon, but it's a waiting game. So all we can really do is just predict on what we think will be there if there is a Nintendo Direct sooner rather than later.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I do agree with you. I do think that there has to be news on first party. However, my mind kind of is sitting at like, look, we have Age of Imprisonment, Metroid Prime 4, and Kirby Air Riders. And those are the only games that Nintendo has revealed so far, right? But for me, it's like, I still think there's another game because Pokemon's in October this year and not November. And to me, that screams, hey, we might have something else that's bigger. Now, it's not going to be 3D Mario like I've seen some people theorize. That's crazy. Save it for next year, 40th anniversary. But I do think that there is something to be said about potentially, having another somewhat of a showcase in September. And I think for me, what makes the most sense right now is give us a 20-minute direct announcing 15 to 30 third party games coming to Switch 2. Maybe throw in a new trailer for Kirby or whatever if you don't want to drop it on Twitter. And then after that, in September, you've got a big 45-minute showcase that shows all the stuff coming the rest of the year and then the stuff coming through March, right? Like I think that's probably what we're gonna get. But I think you and I are on the same page that they cannot continue to sit idly and not reveal anything. Like the Switch 2 needs announcements. Like the jump from launch to now has been fine. It's been good. But considering the momentum, like, I do feel that there's going to be a drop off if there are not announcements soon.
Absolutely. I would argue that I've really enjoyed the Nintendo Switch 2 launch period in many ways. I would argue that it might be better than a Nintendo Switch 1 launch period because so much of that launch period was focused around ports from the Wii U, which were, it was fine. But here we get a fair bit of new games and third party ports, as well as just some other surprises here and there. I mean, we're getting what Dragon Drive, the game of the year 2025 in what is
That's
it?
this month. Yeah,
That's
or August. That's
July? Oh,
August.
I was gonna say
That's
that felt like
August,
August.
yeah.
Yeah, and
But
no.
see, that's my point. Like that game was dated on Nintendo Today,
Oh
and
God.
that's already our August game. So like for me, I feel like that we have the lineup all the way through August. I don't feel like that they need to necessarily to drop a direct this month for August. But for September, like I can so see them doing what they did for, Mario, the Mario 3D All Stars, right? They just dropped a direct and it released the next week.
Yeah, I definitely agree that there's a very clear gap here, and if Nintendo wants to continue the momentum they've built since launch, then they need to give us something real to work with, whether it's a entirely something for big first party that could come in November, or a bunch of third party games that would be great on the Nintendo Switch too, specifically. And my hope, though my worry, is that ideally, the next direct would focus entirely on Switch 2 games, right? And the problem is, I don't think, when it comes to third party, yes, I think the Nintendo Switch 2 will be the main focus. But what concerns me about the next Nintendo Direct in general is that you're going to get a fair amount of games available on both the Switch 2 and Nintendo Switch, which personally, as someone who's been living in the hell of more games announced for PlayStation 4, it's I'm over it. Just move on to the next one, please.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree we will see quite a few games for Switch, but I do think that that will be more treated in line with like coming to Switch 2 and Switch, right? I don't think we're going to get a lot of games that are Switch exclusive, which that's not even a thing. I do think that all the games that are coming out from this point on are going to have a Switch 2 version that's going to run better. And I do think that there will be a huge focus on Switch 2 third party because these developers are developing for that. They are not happy and they are not using the regular Switch at this point, at least the big third party ones. I mean, like Capcom, I know Capcom's cooking a new Monster Hunter for the Switch too. I mean, it's pretty, put two and two together. They're very happy to use the Switch too. I mean, Street Fighter 6 runs amazing. So I'm sure that they're more than willing to move on from the Tegra X1.
Yeah, I mean, Capcom, I can definitely see, especially with how many games have sort of not really made the jump yet to Nintendo Switch 2. I could see an entire segment dedicated entirely to Resident Evil and making sure those games finally get a proper port on Nintendo
Yeah.
consoles instead of a cloud version. But yeah, I think you're right. I think that third party needs to happen sooner rather than later. And what better month than July when we're kind of in this gray period because despite my earlier comments, Dragon Drive isn't enough. And we don't really
No.
have a big third party game other than I believe Final Fantasy VII Remake, which is coming out in winter. So we're just kind of left in the dark until Donkey Kong and then Pokemon. And that is a gap between July and October. So we need something to fill that gap. And what better way to do that than with third parties?
Absolutely. So I think let's kind of talk about what we expect. And, I will say, yes, obviously, I would assume that a majority of third party games releasing in the future are going to come to Switch 2. I think that that's a focus by many publishers. I mean, for example, we're not going to include games like Final Fantasy Tactics, right? That's coming to Switch and Switch 2. We know it's coming, not a big deal. But I think the focus for us here on third parties, when we're talking about third parties that are going to get people excited, and I understand, right? Ports of games that already came out aren't the most exciting for everyone, and that's totally fair. But I think you have to realize that the Switch has over 150 million users, and a large portion of those don't use another console. So the fact that we are getting ports of these games over is a big deal for a lot of people that might even consider people to upgrade to the Switch too. So in terms of ports that I expect, I think let's dive into what you already said. I think Resident Evil 4, Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 3 are coming to Switch 2. I think that makes so much sense. I think it's something that is a no-brainer, and especially after it was already confirmed that like the cloud versions were didn't do as well as people thought they were going to, which shocking. I think it's kind of a no-brainer decision for those games to come over to Switch 2 and really allow for, a 60 FPS experience on the go, which is awesome. I mean, you have to remember, you can say what you want. Resident Evil 4 runs on an iPhone.
Yeah, if it can run on an iPhone, it can easily run on a Nintendo Switch too. And, not only just Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 3, and Resident Evil 4 remakes, but I also think 7 and 8 will make a very
Agreed.
natural jump to the Switch too. And I think that'd be great. I pipe dream, but it would be nice if, we got a back to back announcement of all these Resident Evil games and maybe even Resident Evil 9 on the Switch 2, which I believe we talked about in the last episode.
Yeah, I struggle with Requiem coming to Switch 2. I will say this. I would be starstruck if that game makes it at launch, but I do think that there is a significant chance that it does come to Switch 2 down the road. It's just going to have to be worked on, right? I have from the stuff that I saw, I think, and again, we have to wait for the full game to see what technologies they're really using. But depending on what Capcom is using, I definitely think that that's going to require more work than the games we just talked about. But I agree, the remake trilogy and then 7 and Village should have zero issue coming to Switch 2. That's a no-brainer decision. And as someone who adores Resident Evil, I will buy every single one of those. So, I mean, just the fact of like, hey man, you can play RE4 remake on a Switch 2 is crazy. That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, all those Resident Evil remakes are so good, and I would kill to have them on a naturally supported handheld because I like the Steam Deck, don't get me wrong, but this is just a whole different level. I would rather have something that actually has a decent battery life, quite frankly. But yeah, I think that's a very good starting place. In terms of other Capcom games, I think one of the other ones that would be nice to see on the Switch too, but I don't know if there's any sort of reason for it. Because with Resident Evil, you can make the argument, oh, they want to port all the Resident Evil games in preparation for 9, so it's all available on one platform. But Devil May Cry 5 really would be nice to have a port on Switch 2. But I'm not sure how likely it is that'll happen.
So Devil May Cry 5 is like one of my favorite games of the last 6 years, right? I adore this game. I think it's more likely than we think. And the reason I say that is because obviously Capcom is still pushing DMC5 to this day. And it was actually just announced a couple weeks ago that it surpassed 10 million units after the trash Netflix show. So I think that that's great news. It's continuing to push units. The interest is high from people watching the anime, right? So I think that that's something that we have to look at. And let's be honest, Devil May Cry 6 is not coming out for quite a bit of time. I think it makes a lot of sense to bring that over to Switch, especially because, like, dude, Devil May Cry 5 Special Edition is gonna have zero issue running on the console. I'm sorry. Like, it's gonna have zero issue running at 1080p. And I think why not bring that over and just say, hey, DMC5 SE, now we get to talk about DMC5 for another 5 years. Like, why not do it? I agree though. It's way less likely than the Resident Evil games, but I do think that it's way more likely than I think we're giving it credit for. Capcom as well. I also think that Monster Hunter Wilds is a game that makes a lot of sense to come over. Now, granted, that game runs terribly, so I wouldn't be surprised, considering the issues it has on PC, if it doesn't make the jump, just because it's very demanding and one would say maybe unoptimized. But I think that the DLC for that game is coming out next year. It would make a lot of sense to drop that on the Switch 2 next year and have a whole new, mountain of players come in and check out the game alongside the expansion. But again, I don't know how likely that is. And with Capcom and everything they've got going on, there's a lot of games that also could come to Switch 2 beyond that. Dragon's Dogma 2, all this stuff. It's anyone's guess. But I think if we have to say what is like almost a guarantee, it's the Resident Evil games for sure.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think out of all of Capcom's library, a Resident Evil collection, I don't think it'll be released as a collection. It'd be cool, but just in general, all those games coming to the Switch 2 just feels perfect, and I can absolutely see Capcom capitalizing on the hype for Requiem and taking advantage of that for the new system. And, there's a conversation to be had later about Monster Hunter specifically, because there is a category of third party that we're not considering beyond ports, and that is third party developers making games exclusively for the Switch 2. One big example of that coming soon, ideally, is the Duskbloods from Software. So it is possible that, like with the original Switch, Capcom could make their own Monster Hunter for the Switch too. I think it'll be a while before that comes out, since Wilds just came out not that long ago. But I think those kind of games are worth considering and looking into.
Yeah, I hinted at that earlier, but I would say with pretty high confidence that there is a portable quote unquote Monster Hunter coming. Now is that next year? I don't know. Considering that Capcom's lineup next year is Onimusha Wave the Sword, Pragmata, and Requiem. I don't know that they're squeaking in a Monster Hunter game when they're also releasing that expansion for Wilds, but I do think there's an argument for it to be in 2027. But considering the Monster Hunter team goes from, we've seen the pattern of going from World to Rise to Wilds, there's going to be a portable one. So I would expect that it comes to Switch 2. Probably, I would say Switch 2 and PC this time. That's what my guess would be.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that would make a lot of sense for Capcom, especially trying to continue to build the Monster Hunter franchise, which at this point I'm pretty sure is their biggest franchise in terms of just raw sales.
For sure.
And yeah, in terms of other games I would throw into the ring in terms of a Switch 2 port coming soon and potentially announced at a direct, I like to go with a maybe obvious one, Doom the Dark Ages. I was actually quite surprised that we didn't get a port announced recently, but a lot of the recent Doom games have run very well on Switch hardware, and I could absolutely see them being able to pull off a port of the Dark Ages for the Switch too.
Yeah, I think that's a given, to be honest. Doom and Doom Eternal sold actually really well on Switch from what we're, made aware of. I think the Dark Ages is a game that makes a lot of sense. Bring that over. My hope is that we get upgrades for Doom and Doom Eternal to actually run and look like they should. Not that they run bad on the Switch too, but I would like an enhanced version. But I do think that the Dark Ages makes a ton of sense, consider all things considered. And we'll have to see. I think Bethesda has a lot of games that they could bring over, I think, beyond the Dark Ages. And I think one of those that is pretty much a guarantee in my mind is Oblivion Remastered. I would be surprised, honestly, if that game doesn't come out this year. Skyrim was notoriously, one of the games that they showed off whenever the Switch was revealed, and it released in November of that year. Very popular, sold very well. the anniversary update collection thing came to Switch as well. I really do expect Oblivion Remastered to be announced for Switch 2 this year. I really do.
Yeah, I completely agree. I was actually just going to bring up other Xbox slash Bethesda games and even Activision as well, which we'll get to later. But Oblivion is a big one. I think that's absolutely going to make its way to the Switch too before the year ends. And this one's more of a long shot, but on the subject of Oblivion, I would like to see other Bethesda IPs, big IPs from Bethesda, like the core team. Fallout is a big one. Fallout
Right.
4 at the very least. I don't see, as much as I would like it, I don't see New Vegas getting a port. And 3, I think that is rumored to have a remaster at some point. So I figured they'll just wait for that. And, maybe we'll get Fallout
Yeah.
76 on the Switch too. Who knows?
I was going to
But
say, I think for Fallout, I think 76 is the most likely because that game is still going and is still popular. I do think Fallout 4 would make sense though. Fallout 5 is years away. I think dropping 4 and introducing Nintendo fans to that franchise beyond, because they had Fallout Shelter on Switch. Remember that
they did,
kind of
yes.
small game? So I think, dropping Fallout 4, and I mean, you got to think about it, right? And if you're Bethesda, that's a whole new audience for you. That game has sold so many copies. It's been out for so many years. The system can easily run it. Like, why not just put in the effort? It's going to sell. And I think people would love to play that portably. Fallout 76, same thing. I see that doing well on the Switch, honestly. I also would be curious to see Elder Scrolls Online make the jump. Just, because that's the thing. With the Switch being portable, I do feel that there's an audience that's like, okay, wow, I can bring this wherever I am, just connect it with internet and hop on the MMO. And I think there's an argument that that is an audience that is kind of untapped right now because most of these games are only on consoles and PC. But we'll have to see. Online MMOs weren't necessarily a huge point of the Switch, weren't really big there. So I'm not sure what Bethesda's going to do there. But I also will say, beyond those games, I do think that Starfield will make its way over to Switch too, most likely, considering that there is still content being developed for it.
There is. I forgot about that. I
Yeah,
I I played Starfield very briefly at launch, and it's a game. It is somewhat playable. I got soft lock within 5 hours, as you do in a Bethesda game. So I would think bringing that to Switch 2 players is just perfect. It's a match made in heaven. Jokes aside, I completely agree that Starfield makes a lot of sense for the Switch too. And building on Fallout, as you said, I think that'll be very successful, especially with how big the show has been lately.
oh, it's
And
huge.
yeah, and season 2, I believe, is coming out later this year, actually.
Hmm.
So that would be a great excuse to say, hey, the show we have is doing pretty well. What if we brought our game franchise to more audiences? And what better way to do that than with 4 and 76? Again, I would love if New Vegas got a port, especially with how big of a role New Vegas is set to play in the new season of the show, but that's more of a pipe dream than anything. Though, on the subject of Obsidian, I could totally see Avowed also making its way to the Switch too.
Agreed. Agreed. And I will say on New Vegas, the reason I don't think that's going to happen whatsoever is because there was not that game wasn't even available on PS4.
Yeah,
So I don't think it's going to happen. But I agree with you. When these companies look at games, take Fallout that span different mediums, right? The TV series is a huge excuse to say, hey, Fallout 4, Fallout 76, available now on Switch 2, go have a blast. And people are going to watch the show and be like, oh, awesome, and buy the game. It makes a lot of sense. And to jump on your point of Avowed, absolutely. Just being honest, I expect almost every single Xbox Game Studios game to jump to Switch 2. Xbox is a third party publisher at this point. I see no other reason to expect that. I expect pretty much everything from this year and last year, even Indiana Jones, Avowed, South of Midnight, all these games that they have talked about and released already this year. I fully expect to come to Switch 2. Also, like Outer Worlds 2, the Outer Worlds made it to Switch. Now, granted, that was before Microsoft was controlling their publishing, but I still do think that all these games are going to make it over.
yeah, completely agree. I think as you said, South of Midnight, Indiana Jones, Doom: The Dark Ages, all these big games will probably make their way to the Switch too. And remind me, I don't remember actually, did Wolfenstein ever make its way to the Switch too? Or the
It
original
did.
Switch?
It
It
did.
did? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, because Doom Eternal, Wolfenstein 1, Wolfenstein 2, Wolfenstein the Youngblood all came to the Switch. So I could totally see more support from Bethesda's side of things. I would love Dishonored port, but I'm pretty sure that franchise doesn't exist anymore, only in the memories of those who played it. And in terms of core Xbox, Hellblade 2, kind of a no-brainer. Hopefully they can get that game running on the Switch too. And my biggest dream, it's the closer we get, the less it feels like a dream and more it feels like a potential reality. But Halo on the Switch too.
I think it's gonna happen.
Yeah, that would be so good. I think Gears also has a big chance of making it to the
I
Switch
I was gonna
too.
say I do think that I do kind of expect to see Gears of War Reloaded come to Switch 2 this year at some point. Just kind of with everything going on with Xbox pushing out that way, I think Gears makes its way over. And next year they have they've already teased Halo. I think that you'll see the MC. Now, granted, MCC had a ton of development issues, and as much as I would love to see it on Switch 2 and PlayStation, that's going to be so much work. Like, it's going to be a ton of work. And now, granted, I think the games would sell amazing, but it's going to depend on if Microsoft's willing to put in the work or not. I will say I do think that Halo will make its way to Switch in one way or the other. And when you look at all the stuff that Microsoft has coming out too, like the Double Fine game is going to come to Switch. It just will. I think Psychonauts 2 also will come to Switch. There's a lot. I mean, you have to look also. We can't even look in the past, even the last year. Like you have to look at the last like 5 years of games and think about what's coming. Personally, I highly expect Forza Horizon 5 to also come to Switch.
Yeah, I think so too. I think you know, building off that Halo point, if not Master Chief Collection, I could totally see Halo Infinite making its way to the Switch too. That game is still getting updates, and even though it's not played as much as it was at launch, that feels like a very good softball game to release on the Switch too and on PlayStation. So I think if not Master Chief Collection, that I could absolutely see that making its way. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think there are a lot of other games like Forza, as you said, and looking a little bit into the future, we already know that Call of Duty will eventually make its way to the Switch too. Well, to Nintendo consoles in general, but specifically probably the Switch too. So it wouldn't surprise me if Black Ops 7, I think we're at 7.
Yeah, it's
Um,
7.
yeah, there's
It's
been
coming
so
this
many.
year. Something's
Yeah,
coming.
so I
If
feel
it's
like
not Black
that.
Ops 7, I think it's a port of an older game. But something is coming, and I do think, you bring up a great point with Black Ops 7. They might as well just go and develop for the Switch 2 now and get it on there now instead of delaying the inevitable and, go from there. But I do think that that game is coming for sure.
Yeah, and in terms of ports, it would be nice, considering how much emphasis they're building on the Black Ops franchise to get a port of one and especially two, um, because those games are obviously going to be very key for the next Black Ops game. I'm not the biggest Call of Duty fan. They release one every year. It's hard to keep up. So I I I agree that if not 7 this year, we'll get something, and that franchise has to make its way to the Switch 2 sooner rather than later. I'm pretty sure
Hmm.
that was even brought up in the court case when Xbox was buying Activision, that it had to come to the Switch.
They signed an agreement for 10 years and starts this year. So,
There you go. So yeah, I think that's a big one. I think in terms of other MMOs and kind of sticking with Xbox's smorgasbord of different companies that they own, World of Warcraft would be nice. I think
hmm
that's a big franchise, and that would be kind of a big deal putting it on the Switch too. And other Blizzard games, maybe StarCraft, who knows? And at the very least, Overwatch 2 will probably get a proper upgrade.
yeah, I mean, Overwatch 2, that was available on Switch and it actually ran pretty well, to be honest with you. So I think that that's definitely due for an upgrade. And yeah, I mean, all the Blizzard stuff, I do think will continue to come over one way or the other. It'll just kind of depend on, I do think we're going to be playing catch up for a period of companies, pushing out these games that were, they wanted to bring to Switch but just couldn't with the technicals come out and bring over to the system, which I think will take about 2 years. So I do think that it'll take some time, but I mean, yeah, I fully expect the whole Xbox slate to be over here by year three.
Definitely. But I think that raises just another big question. Xbox is almost certainly making, probably going to put its most of its backlog and catalog of games over the years onto the Switch too. Do we think PlayStation could start to do the same, even in little ways, just because of, we recently got the Patapon announcement, which was a huge surprise personally. And, a game like Astrobot would feel right at home on the Switch too. It's just a matter of whether PlayStation's current leadership are interested in that sort of thing.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I mean, I think there's a good point to bring up that it just got announced a couple days ago that Helldivers is coming to Xbox, right?
Yeah, it did. And that would also be a great game to put on the Switch too, And that's a game that is fully taking advantage of having a big ecosystem. And PlayStation's clearly way more open to putting their games on other consoles compared to just a few years ago, where they were very stubborn about that sort of thing. So I think there is more of a chance that games that have an audience or could have an audience on multiple platforms could make their way to the Switch 2 specifically. I mean, if not something like Spider-Man or God of War, those big games, maybe Ratchet and Clank, Rift Apart, that would be perfectly at home on the Switch 2 with its kind of audience.
Absolutely. But yeah, it'll be interesting to kind of see what Sony does there because, I mean, they've already pushed out to PC. I know that they continue to say that Nintendo isn't a competitor for them, which is hilarious. But I do think it's only a matter of time before they start all their games going day and date on PC. And I do think that we will see some stuff come to Switch. I mean, we saw Lego Horizon, right? That came over, and that did probably the best on any console on Switch, I guarantee you.
Yeah, and there is a lot of franchises that PlayStation has under its belt, both past and present, that would be perfect on the Switch. And we already mentioned a few. Ratchet and Clank, Patapon's already making its way over. I would love to see Spider-Man on the Switch too. God of War would be fun. Knowing Naughty Dog, let's get our fifth port of The Last of Us Part 1 and 2, at least. How many ports are we at? Five, four? Something like that. And other games of that nature. I mean, if we're bringing back Patapon, we could always bring back older titles. Ratchet and Clank, original Ratchet and Clank, Sly Cooper, Jack and Daxter, and that again, it's more dependent. It's more of an unknown compared to Xbox because
Hmm.
PlayStation has been very much mixed when it comes to their propensity to bring back older franchises.
Yeah, no, it'll be interesting to see. I think that there's a lot of potential there, and what they bring to the Switch too is kind of going to be, I think, a coin flip, honestly. But I'm excited to see. But I want to move on because we've got a lot of publishers to talk about here. Another one for me that I think is pretty much just a ticking time bomb at this point is Bandai Namco. And that's because we have like Digimon Story Time Stranger. Like that game has been rated. We know it's coming to Switch 2. Where is the announcement?
Yeah, and there are a lot of other. I think Bandai Namco. Who knows? Maybe the Souls games can make their way over to the Switch too, as well, or even Armored Core 6 at the very least. I think that would be a very fun game on the Switch too. And yeah, there are so many rapid fire developers we can very quickly run through almost. I think one that I can easily throw out that's been rumored for the Switch 2 for a while is Marvel Rivals. That game is getting a lot of updates every month, every few weeks it feels like. And putting that sort of game on the Switch 2 is a recipe for success because that game is huge. I still see so many people playing it these days.
Absolutely. I mean, that's something that makes a lot of sense. We look at these games that are really popular right now and free to play or whatnot on Xbox, PlayStation, PC. Marvel Rivals is a game that is going to continue to have life for at least another 2 years in my mind. And with that being the case, I think that it's, again, a no brainer that that's coming to Switch 2. And, even beyond Marvel Rivals, like there's so many different free to play games that are out there that I think could make the jump to Switch 2. I mean, Fortnite's already available, it got an upgrade, but I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility to see stuff like potentially Valorant or Destiny 2 make the jump, right?
Agreed. I think those sort of games will have a huge market on the Switch too. And with the added mouse controls, you could probably also get games that you would never imagine on the original Switch make their way to the Switch too. I mean, it's a long shot, but something like League of Legends would be pretty big on the Switch too. I am not a League fan, and for those who are League fans, I am deeply sorry. However, I think that sort of game with the mouse controls would feel right at home on the Switch too. And kind of similar to that same vein of Valorant and other Riot games, I think Valve could be another PC esque title or company that provides huge support for the Switch 2. They already added Portal 1 and Portal 2 to the original Switch. Maybe Half Life would be very nice, the original Half Life games.
Yeah, I mean, I really don't think that's the thing with the Switch. We were very constrained. Like, we had very big ambitions and thoughts of what could come to the console. But obviously, we were very constrained in what was possible even for developers to bring over. But all of that's been thrown out the window with Switch 2. And so it's really an open book at this point as to what might get announced and what might get shown. But I mean, as you can see, we've talked about so many different options here, and I really do think that there's a lot of opportunity here and there. And I mean, I know, one other company we talked earlier about, Square Enix, Final Fantasy VII remake Intergrade's already confirmed to be coming over. I can tell you right now, Rebirth's 100% coming. Like, they've already said remake project 100 times. It's a no-brainer decision, and it's going to be really hilarious to see the Steam Deck users find out what a game developed for a single system looks like. So, shots
Yeah,
intended.
yeah, yeah, definitely. And I completely agree with said shots. And speaking of Square, there's a huge missed opportunity, a cardinal sin that needs to be rectified from the original Switch. Kingdom Hearts needs a
Yeah.
proper port on the Switch too. That needs a real port, not a cloud port. If it can make its way to the Steam and Steam Deck, it can absolutely make its way to the Switch too.
I think this one is something that's going to happen. But this isn't a Square Enix podcast, but Kingdom Hearts 4 is just not coming out anytime soon. I don't really care what people think. It's simply not coming out anytime soon. So I think that's something that I think Square might hold off on a little bit, but I would be shocked if those ports do not come out before KH4 because I do believe that they're going to try to get KH4 to come on Switch too.
Yeah, they know, at this point, everyone knows how much of a disaster the cloud launches were, and I could see quite a few of those games getting repurposed for the Switch 2 as proper releases, probably game key cards, all things considered, but that's neither here nor there. And unfortunately, there are certain games that got cloud releases that I highly doubt will get a new release. Guardians of the Galaxy, great game of all
Yeah.
things, got a cloud release on the original Switch. And as much as I adore that game, I don't think that's going to come to the Switch too.
No, I agree. And that was a great game. Really, really great game. Go play it if you haven't. It's like $6 on the Steam sale right now. It's a great game. Was just telling
Y-
someone about that the other day.
yeah, it's arguably one of Marvel's most underrated games of the last few years,
I
and
I
it
think it's a better
sucks.
game. I think it's a better game than a certain sequel that everyone acted like was the greatest game of all time that came out in 2023. But beyond that, hot takes aside,
Ouch.
I do think that there is a lot of potential for Square in general. Beyond, seven, I will happily talk about this. Beyond seven and the remake trilogy, 16 is an option. Yoshi P kind of already hinted at that, talking about how the only Switch 2 is left. I do think that they'll try to get that game to come over to Switch 2. Now, granted, I think it will run, but how well will it run? I think better than Series S because of DLSS, but it'll be interesting nonetheless. But a game that I think a lot of people aren't thinking about that I would personally just love to see is a port of FF15 because with Final Fantasy 15, the Royal Edition released on Xbox One and PlayStation 4 and PC. And Switch never got that, even though that Royal Edition came out after the Switch was already out. And I just think that if you're Square Enix, you need to make your games available everywhere as possible because people will buy them. And I think that a port of Final Fantasy 15 would get a lot of people excited more than you might think because that game has just not really been talked about for years. And to just bring it back and be like, hey, you can play this now on the go is pretty cool. So it's not my favorite Final Fantasy, but I did really enjoy that game for what it is. And I do think that it would be a really fun experience on the go. Granted, we have the Pocket Edition, but I think that the full game can easily run on the system. The problem is, though, and I keep continuing, but I keep thinking of more things. The problem with this idea of mine is that, Luminous is no more. So, granted, there are definitely still developers there that worked on that engine and worked on that game, but that would have to be a project that they would have to specifically designate people for, considering that engine is no longer in use. So, I don't know the likelihood of it. I would say it's not very likely, but I do think that a port of FF15 would actually sell pretty well.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think, as you said, with FF15, there are a lot of complications. And we also need to think about interest level. There are a lot of games that would have very high interest levels on the Switch 2. Games that potentially were supposed to get Nintendo Switch ports. Games like Hi-Fi Rush. That's coming sooner rather than later. If not for the Nintendo Switch 2, then at least for both Switch and Switch 2. And it's just a question of how much the developers want to invest in the undertaking it may require to put these games on the Switch 2. Because, and this is bringing up another point related to the Switch 2 as a whole, but kind of drifting away from the Direct. We have loved our time with the Switch 2, and a lot of the ports run very well, but a lot of the games that are backwards compatible run not well at all.
No, yeah, I have so much to say about this. Yeah, no, they run like trash.
Yeah, and certain games that you wouldn't even expect. I was on a flight to California the other day, and I thought, oh, a great game to play while I'm flying would be Persona 5. I have Persona 5 Royal on my Switch. I never actually played that version of the game, but I figured what better opportunity than now. And it looks like a mobile game. All the characters look blurry. They look like they're fading out of existence. The sprites themselves look great, but the actual in-game models look awful. And it makes me concerned for the prospect of third-party releases. Third party is a no-brainer on the Switch 2. It needs to continue in order for support for the Switch 2 to grow and for it to eventually surpass the original Switch, which it already is on track to do. But the issue is there's a lot of the developers, third-party developers, I don't trust in order to make these sort of decisions and take care of these games that they've released in the past. Persona 5, for instance, could it get a port or a proper update for a Nintendo Switch 2? Absolutely. But it'll probably cost quite a bit of money.
Yeah, I mean, we have to look at trends from developers and publishers, right? Like Atlas, instead of offering just an upgrade for PS5, they charged for an entire version and you could not upgrade P5R on PS4 to PS5. I highly expect if and only if they go back and decide to do this with P5R for Switch 2, you're going to have to pay $60 again and a key card. And it's crazy because it's like, I mean, here's the problem. The problem with these games, and this is what people got to understand, right? So the problem with these games is that on the Nintendo Switch, right, the screen was 720p. So games tapped out at 720p, and most of them were targeting that or 540p. So I'll give you an example. Xenoblade, right? Xenoblade 1 or 2. These games, incredible games. They look terrible on Switch too. And people, we just released a video about this. I talked in depth about it and my thoughts on it. And I adore these games to death, but I'm not afraid to call it like it is. And it's honestly near unacceptable what some of these games look like on Switch. And here's the problem. The problem is that many of these games we're not running at 720p in handheld, and we're actually running at lower resolution. So take Xenoblade. 540p is what they were tapped out at for handheld, right? So on Switch, it actually didn't, it wasn't great, but it didn't look that bad because you're playing on a 720p screen, right? You're playing at 540p scaled up to 720. It's not that bad. The problem becomes when you get the Switch 2 with the 1080p screen, you're scaling 540p to 720 and then again to 1080p. So the result is this super smeared, blurry image that's stretched to 1080p. And it's just something that has been super consistent across almost all of the third-party major releases that I've tested on Switch 2. Like another example, like the Crash games, right? Like they got those to work on the original Switch and they ran awesome for that platform. But I'm like, they're not going to get an upgrade for Switch 2. Like, there's no way that Activision goes back and does that. And so at this point, we're kind of stuck with this inferior version of the game, even though we have a much beefier system, because we're at the mercy of these publishers to release patches. And I don't expect that it's going to happen. I really don't.
Yeah, and even future ports from said publishers also make me sort of nervous. I mean, Ubisoft promised by accident that they were going to release a new version of the Mario Plus Rabbids Sparks of Hope game for a Nintendo Switch follow up, quote unquote. But honestly, I don't see them actually following through with that. And if a game like Assassin's Creed Shadows, for instance, makes its way to Nintendo Switch 2, I don't see that performing that well. I mean, even if they make it in mind for the Switch 2, we need to be cautious of these sort of developers that have a track record of not doing the most to take care of these games. Whether it's Ubisoft, EA, which, EA just recently took Anthem offline, and other things like that, where they are not going to go back and update an older game. Though, granted, EA never really supported the original Switch that much in the first place. And don't even get me started on 2K. We just got an announcement that WWE 2K25 it's going to make its way to the Switch too. And I am not sure about how that's going to look because that game runs poorly on PlayStation 5. So that doesn't fill me with confidence at all. So, kind of getting back to our main point of this idea of ports and that all being exciting, in a potential Nintendo Direct that could maybe come this month and focus on third party games, I think now we need to be a bit more wary of certain publishers and how they will support previous games, whether it's with new updates or ports or releasing new games for the console, right? I mean, going back to Atlas, it's pretty safe to assume that Persona 3 Reload and Metaphor Refantasio will, or is it Refantasio? I can't
Refantasio.
figure.
They're
It's
coming to Switch too.
Refantasio. Yeah, definitely. But I wouldn't be surprised if those are full price. Not even 60, but 70.
Oh, they will be. They will be. I mean, I see no reason for that not to be the case. Now, granted, with Metaphor, I do think that Metaphor, there's a chance that they're going to save it for the fall and they're going to release Metaphor RR.
Oh God, they would do that, or better yet, a new version of Persona 3 Reload that actually includes the female protagonist. Even though they said they were never going to do that, but they will do it now because it makes them money. So yeah, it's this complicated dilemma of how do you get excited for the prospect of more third party games and more third party support? Because the third party support we've had so far is very promising. But at the same time, because of backwards compatible games being left by the wayside and the overabundance of game key cards, which have already destroyed mine and so many others' storage to the point where, I already had to get another SD card not that long after I got the Switch 2. It just makes me slightly more concerned and pessimistic about the future of third party support on the Switch 2.
I totally agree. I mean, it's just something that for me, like, look, I'm super excited. I'm thrilled for these new games that are coming over, and I'm going to be playing all of them. And I know they're going to run well. But considering we have like this incredible library on the Switch that's just being left to rot, seemingly, it's not a great feeling. And it's like, I want to play those games at higher resolutions and higher frame rates, but it just doesn't seem like that's going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So right now, I guess all of our hopes are sort of in the hands of Nintendo's first party, which doesn't say a lot for third party support so far. And again, I am not dismissing upcoming third party support because it does look very exciting. I mean, we already mentioned it to you. Final Fantasy Remake Integrate is going to be great on the Switch too. But certain games have me more cautious than excited. And in the case of first party, we briefly talked about this at the beginning. There are a lot of games still unanswered for. So I guess we've already talked a fair bit about Switch 2 ports and third party games that could be announced in a future direct. I want to now focus, if we can, on first party games. If we do, in this insane scenario, somehow get a first party and third party direct soon, what do we think needs to be announced and what we want to be announced or shown off?
I mean, I don't expect any new. I expect one new game announcement for the rest of the year. I don't think it's going to be a huge title, but I think it will be something of substance. I think that we will get, dates for Kirby Air Riders. We will get a date for Metro Prime 4, and we will get a date for Age of Imprisonment. And beyond that, really, I mean, I think an update for GameCube Online and maybe ending off with a tease for one of the games that's coming out for Switch 2 in the first part of next year. That would be great. And I'm just realizing as I'm talking about this, I do think that that game that I keep talking about that I think might be this year or not sure, it's going to be the Splatoon spinoff.
Is that confirmed for this year? I thought
It
that was
was already rated.
2026. Oh,
It's
it
not
is?
dated. It's not dated. It was already
Oh,
rated. Yeah.
then
So,
yeah, I think so too. I mean, I think a future first slash third party direct could have a bombshell of a Animal Crossing announcement because if
mhm.
you really want to hook players in early, you have four big options for hooking people to buy a Switch 2: 3D Mario, New Big Zelda, Mario Kart, or Animal Crossing. And we've already got Mario Kart, so now we're just waiting for the other three. And I think it'll be a while before we get a long while before we get a new big Zelda. 3D Mario will probably be soon, but not until maybe late 2026 or 2027. So I think Animal Crossing's next. And, there's probably a debate about whether or not an Animal Crossing new game for Animal Crossing would take away from Tomodachi Life, which I am very excited for. But realistically, I think people are just going to end up buying both because both of those games are very popular. And, myself included, I can totally see myself sinking a lot of time into both Animal Crossing and Tomodachi Life. So I think that's going to be Nintendo's big game going into the first half of 2026,
Mhm.
and I could see that announcement coming sooner rather than later. But in terms of what's left for the latter half of 2025, other than Splatoon and Pokemon, it's
Well,
anyone's guess.
I want to say, I'm looking at this like I'm not sure actually on the rating for Splatoon. I will say, regardless, I still do think that it can come out this year, but I do think that that game, if I were to pick a date for it, it would be like March.
Yeah,
Like
agreed.
I
February or
think
March.
first half next year makes a lot of sense because I agree. I think the big games for next year are going to be Animal Crossing, the Splatoon spinoff, and then the 3D Mario game, and potentially some kind of Zelda because we get a Zelda every year of some sort. Which, hey, I have an idea: Twilight Princess, Wind Waker HD.
Yeah, at the very least, Twilight Princess I think would be a no-brainer on the Switch 2. There's going to be some excuse like, "Oh, Wind Waker is already on Switch 2." That
But
doesn't
here's the thing.
count.
No, here's the thing. Here's the reason why I think that these games have been held off. So we already have two games confirmed for Switch next year, right? We have Rhythm Heaven and what's the other one?
Tomodachi Life.
Tomodachi Life. Those two are already confirmed. Those are going to be Switch and Switch 2 releases. Nintendo's not just going to release 2 games for Switch next year. They need another one that's more substantial. And so I think that's where you get Twilight Princess and Wind Waker HD in, and you release them for Switch and Switch 2. And so that way, you've got a game for both consoles, but you've got Zelda for both too. And that's a port. You don't have to worry about it. It's probably been done for years. Um, but I think that's something that makes a lot of sense. And beyond that, if we're talking about stuff that might come out this year, that, back to our topic of the direct, I personally do think that Metroid Prime 2 and 3 has to happen before Prime
Oh, it's a
4,
no-brainer. Yeah.
right? So I do think that, there is a chance that, let's say that Splatoon is next year, which is the most likely in my opinion. And let's say that we get Prime 4 in November or October. I think September is when we're going to get Prime 2 and 3.
Agreed. I think it might even be a shadow drop,
Yep,
honestly,
I agree.
compared like the first one. It wouldn't surprise me if they either A, shadow drop 2 and 3 at the same time, or B, say, here's 2 now, 3 comes out in 2 weeks or 1 week or something like that. Um Either or, but I can honestly, I mean, I've been thinking a lot about when Prime 4 could release. If you had asked me just a few months ago, I would have said October. A Halloween release for Metroid Prime 4 feels right. But at the same time, I could also see November, that being the big November game. Because Prime 4, despite what many think of Metroid as this sort of like niche franchise, Dread did pretty well, I think.
Hmm.
And I could totally see Nintendo hedging their bets on Prime 4, especially because we've been waiting for that game for 8 years. So
And
the
it's a game of the year
anticipation is
contender.
high. Yeah,
I mean, it's
absolutely.
guaranteed going to be a game of the year contender. Nintendo's going to market it really, really strongly. It could easily be an early November game.
Agreed. Yeah, I think either late October, early November just feels perfect for Prime 4. And I think that'll be a huge game, and it's a game that I'm very much looking forward to. And in general, I think what we're sort of getting at with this potential direct coming out soon, hopefully, is that the future of Nintendo Switch 2 is unknown, but very bright. There's a lot of games that could come out soon, whether it's third party or first party. And I'm excited for all of it. I mean, speaking about just later this month, Donkey Kong, and that game looks incredible. And I am so excited. And I know that I'm just going to invest so much time into that game. And the Switch 2 has already been a hit, right? That's established at this point. It is on track to become, I'm pretty sure it is already the fastest selling video game console ever.
Yep, it
So,
is by far.
yeah. And Nintendo just needs to continue that momentum. And the Direct is the best way to do it. And even if we're not really sure what could come in that Direct, either way, I think it'll be very exciting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot to love right now with Switch 2. I mean, Nintendo's going to continue to drop free updates for older games. We just got the one for Splatoon a couple weeks ago that was really great, and the game looks awesome now. And I think that overall, I mean, if you're someone who didn't have a Switch and you're jumping in, the first party lineup is incredible. You've so many games to check out, and a lot of them run amazing on the Switch too because of the updates. And, we got to wait on quite a few more. But I think overall, you got to be happy with what we have right now. I just hope they fix Mario Kart Online because my goodness, it's bad.
Yeah, there's a lot of messes right now. Mario Kart Online has been particularly rough, and I'm someone who really likes the intermissions. I'm kind of in the minority on that. I like being able to drive from one track to the next, but that being the only option is insane.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is definitely an argument that I am like. I'll be honest. I'm so happy that 8 Deluxe is still playable on the system because I think Mario Kart World has a ton of awesome tracks and the mechanics are great. It feels so great to play, But I mean, I just have no desire to play the online because it's just so messy right now.
Yeah, and unfortunately, kind of going back to what we talked about in the last episode, as much as the single player is fun, once you're done, that's it, right? There's no replayability. You have no desire to go back to do the Grand Prix. Very little unlocks aside from the ones you get from completing the Grand Prix or the weird ones you get from Kamek's power up. And other than that, that's it. Once you're done with the Grand Prix and once you've kind of explored the free roam, it's just online. And the online's such a mess that right now that there is no reason to go back to the Switch 2 there is no reason to play Mario Kart World right now.
Yeah, sadly.
And the Switch 2, yeah, the Switch 2 is unfortunately, it's great. I love it, but we're sort of in this hibernation period until Donkey Kong comes out.
Which thankfully, we got 2 weeks to go, and that's going to be a great day. We're going to have a lot to say about that one. But I'm very excited for that. And again, just 2 weeks away from Donkey Kong's grand return and what looks like is probably going to be his best game ever. So, with that being said, guys, thank you so much for tuning into this episode. Be sure to let us know in the comments what you thought of, what you're hoping for in a direct this month, potentially, and even beyond. What game are you hoping to get for the Switch 2 in the next year or so? But with that being said, we'll catch you next time, and thanks for tuning in to Switch Point.